The reading clerk will now call the roll.
Adams. Jeffries. Adderholt. Jordan. Aguilar. Jeffries. Alford.
Jim Jordan.
Jordan. Allen. Jordan. Allred. Jeffries. Amodei. Jordan. Armstrong. Jordan. Arrington. Jordan. Auchincloss. Jeffries. Babin. Jordan. Bacon. McHenry. Baird. Jordan. Balderson. Jordan. Ballant. Jeffries. Banks. Jordan. Barr. Jordan. Bedegan. Jeffries. Bean of Florida. Jordan. Beatty. Jeffries. Bentz. Jordan. Barra. Jeffries. Bergman. Jordan.
All right, so we've been listening to voting now on the House floor. They've begun voting for the next Speaker of the House. Hakeem Jeffries and Jim Jordan have put their names forward. But, of course, members can vote for other people, too, which is why you see other on the list there. Jim Jordan cannot afford to lose very many votes at all. And so you want to keep a close eye on that other box, because that's going to give us an indication whether or not he's going to do better than he did in the last two votes, or if it's going to be, you know, a wash again. In the meantime, though, while we're watching what's happening on the House floor, I want to bring Leslie Sanchez back in. Leslie, we heard from Kevin McCarthy. He was the one that did the speech, the nominating speech for Jim Jordan. I know that there's a lot of talk about the need for bipartisanship, but I'm not sure if his speech expressed that.
Well, when he was talking about Jordan's legislative accomplishments, I think there was a little bit of chuckling going on. That's certainly from the left. And a lot of, I think, folks in the middle are wondering the same question that the conference has been struggling with, and that is, if we have Jordan, where do we go from here? And by that, I mean legislatively, any type of compromise on just to move forward with an effective agenda in this fiscal year and next fiscal year would be seen as a surrender by many folks on the extreme right. And that is going to be the rub. So where does that leave the conference in terms of shoring up legislative wins, especially in those swing districts that need to come back with something, especially when they need a vocal opponent to the president's what they believe are failed policies? There will be a tremendous amount of rhetoric, but when that rhetoric involves shutting down the government again next month, I feel it can backfire for Republicans, and that's my concern. I'm in the field almost every day, and while Republicans want a strong opponent to, and want reforms on border security, for example, they need leadership that can actually deliver that. So I think it's going to be a big question mark, win or lose. Where do we go from here?
I thought it was interesting.
Jordan.
Are we dipping back in?
Burleson.
Oh, look, so as far as I understand it, it's 4 votes is what he can afford to lose. And then after that, he's not going to win. He's not going to win the gavel. So right now it looks like there's three. Of course, I haven't been listening, but three other people that votes have been cast for. So we'll see. We'll see if there's one more. Of course, I'll go through the entire roll call, but we'll see if there's, any more. Leslie, and then I want to ask. I'm totally looking at all my notes. Then I want to ask Ashley sort of a similar question. But Leslie, Ashley and I were actually talking about what would unify Republicans. She gave me her answer, but I want to ask you, what is, if there is a singular unifying issue, what would it be? And could Jim Jordan be that person?
So if you take the toughest issue first, Republicans would want to talk about border security. Can they get a leader who's going to say, let's put this on the floor. Let's see who we can, kind of some of those border districts, along the U.S.-Mexico border. Where can we draw support to get somebody to the president, put pressure on the president, and move forward? Where can we get the conference kind of coalesced on that? Are they going to be able to coalesce around the idea of keeping the government going next month? I think those two issues pose the biggest risk for Republicans moving into 2024. And any leader who can come forward and say, I can count those votes, I can move those measures and see how to make that happen. But just throwing a bunch of legislation up there that is just in contrast to the Democrats, contrast to Biden, just to show we did it, that's really great for a talking point, but that doesn't deliver for the people. So the answer is, again, going back to my example I said before with former Speaker Newt Gingrich, he came with 10 items. These are the things we're going to do. We're going to start here. And he rallied the conference around that. There is zero that I understand, and I'm on the phone, zero agreement on what those efforts would be. So hitting the ground running, I'd love to see it, but I think Republicans are scratching their heads.
We're just reading, some of the coverage from the last vote. Three of the Republicans from Texas did not vote for Jim Jordan, which you would think that border protection, what's happening at the border, is top of mind for them, and they obviously weren't convinced that he was the man for the job. But Ashley, I'll ask you, do you see any sort of unifying issues?
No, and I think you made an excellent point off camera, which is there's nothing about, well, I'll just receive it. There's nothing about McCarthy's speech that would enable Democrats to support the Republican nominee, whoever he or she is.
Well, it sounded an awful lot like, here's how Jim Jordan isn't like the Democrats, but not here's how Jim Jordan will help you get the job done.
Jordan. Yeah, absolutely. I will make a prediction. If Jim Jordan wins, the Republicans will lose the House. There's no way to keep the House with that type of leadership, especially given he's, of the far extreme right wing of the party, and they're going to have expectations of him to move forward with impeachment. All the things that we know those moderate, vulnerable Republicans in Biden districts cannot stand for. They cannot accommodate that. But I think, Congresswoman Kathleen Clark made a really great point, which is, when are Republicans going to take yes for an answer? We're talking about border issue, McCarthy elevated border issue. It's clearly a unifying issue for their conference. The president last night laid out a supplemental plan, $100 million, $14 billion of that. 100 billion, 14 billion of that for the border. Take yes for an answer. Are you going to take yes for an answer on that? If not, then I think that'll be an opportunity for Democrats to hit not just those Texas Republicans that you're talking about, but even some of those vulnerable Republicans for saying no to even border security. So there's a lot on the line here for Republicans, but I firmly believe that, and again, the moderates have said as much within their conference that they can't stand to have a Speaker Jordan.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Leslie? Ashley says that this could possibly cost them the House. It's not a good look for Republicans.
We've seen so much infighting overall. There's no way this is a good look. But this is kind of a moment, a polarization, not only in this country, but certainly in our Republican conference. There's no doubt about that. But I keep pressing on the point. So leadership, having worked on the Hill and, worked in many of these committees, it requires a camaraderie to some extent, an understanding of how to bring people together, an understanding of, you don't have to achieve a broad brushstroke of legislative achievements, but Jim Jordan would have to achieve one. And I'm really having a hard time saying, okay, let's put your communications office together, your policy office together. Let's start wrangling, counting votes. The difficulty that you have if you do not have those relationships and that respect within the conference will bleed over into any type of policy agenda that he may move forward. And it cannot just be the party of opposition. Certainly, it needs to be a contrast to what, again, many believe are the failed policies of the Biden administration. There's opportunity there, but it's wrangling. And that is the magic of this type of leadership and the finesse of it. And that is really, I think, where the conference is. Where do we go with someone like Jim Jordan? And there are times we've seen, I've been through many of those votes where Republicans would end up putting a speaker forward who was somebody that was just liked by both sides, all elements, and they could move it forward, right? It wasn't a firebrand. It wasn't somebody who had a lot of controversial, I could start naming names, but there were, a lot of controversial backgrounds. There was a time there. So they put somebody that could really just keep the trains moving and that they could get behind and look toward the bigger Republican agenda. That is where we are right now, is wondering, will this small minority now take ownership of the leadership of the gavel? And where will they take the party? And is it consistent with where the party legislatively needs to go? Not politically, but legislatively, so they can deliver for their offices. And
yeah, no, it's interesting. I was listening to Nikole Killion earlier, and I think she asked Mr. Jeffries a question that really should be asked to the Republicans, which is, what is the alternative? It's clear now Jim Jordan doesn't have enough votes to become the speaker. So who's the alternative to Jim Jordan? Republicans have, in the past, Speaker Ryan being one of them, have nominated someone who begrudgingly took the job, right?
Right.
What about McHenry? Democrats like McHenry. They think they could work with McHenry.
Yeah.
Tom Cole. There are some Republicans on their side who Democrats find, they'll hold their nose, but palpable, right? In the interest of the country. So I think the question now should be, if I can encourage Nikole to go find the Republicans and ask them, well, what's the alternative at this point? Because we've now almost exhausted this possibility for Jim Jordan.
So you had a Denny Hastert that was that
absolutely,
way. People
who
said,
begrudgingly
wow,
took the
let's
job.
just take someone like that and put him in for a while. There are examples of other chairmen that have been nominated because they were the right people, and there wasn't so much animosity, or it wasn't such a charged nomination. And sometimes the speaker role is that way during a confrontational time like this, and that's going to be the question.
My question, which I'm going to ask after we talk to Nikole Killion, is who would want this job?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't know how long you're going to be able to keep it, but we'll get to that. I just want to bring in Nikole Killion, so to sort of explain where we're at. Part of the reason that Ashley said that he's not going to get the speakership is because he didn't have very much wiggle room. We had 4-vote wiggle room. So Nikole, just sort of let us know what's happening now.
Yeah, well, basically it was 4 or 5 because there are some absences today. But look, at this point, he's kind of crossed that line with at least 9 people voting against him. Most interestingly, some of these defectors are now expressing their support for Patrick McHenry, which I don't believe his name was previously in the hat in terms of the balloting. But now we've had several members mention his name instead. And of course, this comes as we have been discussing what is the alternative, what are the backup strategies or plan Bs, if you will. And, there was momentum growing for elevating Patrick McHenry, extending and empowering him to be able to take on a greater role as the interim speaker or speaker pro tem. And there were a number of resolutions that were kind of waiting in the wings. Some members who were intending to bring motions to perhaps make that move and put him in place for a temporary period of time, perhaps through November, perhaps through the end of the year. And that all seemed to fall apart in that GOP conference meeting yesterday, where things got extremely tense. And as we reported, you had former Speaker Kevin McCarthy yelling at Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was the one who pulled the trigger on McCarthy's ouster. Is that plan completely dead? Some say it is, others feel that it is worth resurrecting because, to Ashley's point, in terms of an alternative, that seems to be one of the more viable ones, or at least it was until things fell apart yesterday. Furthermore, you also have McHenry himself putting a clear directive to members in that same meeting yesterday, saying that if we do ever move forward with this plan to give me extra powers in this role as Speaker Pro Tem, that we need to have an explicit vote as a conference first. Otherwise, I won't stay in this job.
I think the other question, though, Nikole, too, is, Democrats voting for Republican is incredibly risky. I was talking to the parliamentarian and a friend who's, it's a sort of a master of the floor, my former colleagues who work for Speaker Pelosi, and I was asking them, could you put limits on, if Democrats were to elect McCarthy, could they put limits on what he could actually legislate on, right? Because you could see a situation where they give him the votes and he brings up some extremist agenda, you know what I mean? And then Democrats would be responsible for whatever he brought to the floor.
Yeah.
And there is no clear answer on that. Could you, if we decided to do with the coalition government, could you put some limitations on what that speaker could do? We would only do, for example, opening up the government, moving the supplemental. These are the limitations of what you could do in this job.
Yeah.
And it's not clear to me that we're able to do that, or they're able to do that in the legislative, in the House. And so that's why it's also very risky for Democrats.
Yeah, Leslie
we've not talked about that yet.
said, like, somebody who can just keep the train on the tracks. And when you said that, Leslie, I thought to myself, I wonder if the nature of the job has changed over the past several speakers. That it's not just kind of making sure that everything runs on time. And now it's become, I would say, a pretty risky position. What would have been a high-profile position that you could maybe benefit from that. Now, I mean, we're going to remember Kevin McCarthy for such a short speaker, and the way he went out,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll ask. Sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
Anne-Marie, the way he went out is agreeing to a rule that could terminate his position.
Well, he also went out, because he did a deal with Democrats to keep the government open. That's also the reason why.
That's true, too.
That's also why he went out. But I will say, to your question, Anne-Marie, though, has the speakership changed? Let's not forget, I worked for a speaker, elected a speaker, who did big bipartisan bills with a slim 5-vote majority, the same majority that the House Republicans have. So you actually can be a big figure and do the right things for the country if you're able to build a coalition, work across the aisle, and make concessions. The problem is Republicans don't want to do that.
And I did think, Leslie, like, before they even sort of go down the road to figure out who's going to replace the speaker, they ought to revisit these rules.
Absolutely.
You would think. And I haven't heard one representative talk about that.
Absolutely.
That was part of the condition in the conversations last week, is that now you have upended this, is the next speaker, are going to remove these rules. So we are not in this situation, every 6 weeks, we're doing this process again and completely missing any opportunity to legislate. And I was thinking, you actually made a good point about Nancy Pelosi. I mean, the contrast that she had as speaker with a Donald Trump, and coming out where they were both really holding their ground, but ultimately finding ways to work together. And politically, it worked for them as well, right? In contrast to what it could have been. Right now, Republicans are not even at the starting line.
Yeah, remember we did a big trade deal with Pelosi did a big trade deal with Donald Trump, right? Like we found some concessions and got things done for the American people, and it can be done. But the question is, do they have the guts and the courage to do it? Will they marginalize the extremists to enable their leaders to do what's in the best interest of the country?
I just want to bring in Nikole, because I know Nicole's trying to get in. Hey, Nikole.
Hey, well, I was just going to say on the whole discussion about the rules debate, I mean, keep in mind, that's part of why we're here at Day 17, because in some of these Republican conference meetings, I mean, before they could even figure out who they wanted to put up as a candidate, there were a lot of discussions had about the path forward and how they would run as a conference, and we've had a number of conversations about that, whether it is reforming that motion to vacate. Many members feel strongly, even even Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who does not like to wade into what's going on here in this chamber, came out a few weeks ago saying that that motion to vacate needs to be reformed, that, you know, it shouldn't be allowed for a small group of members to be able to overthrow the speaker. So there have been some real discussions about that. But the reality is, once again, the GOP conference can't agree on that. You have many hardliners who think, no, we need to keep things as is. And so those were some of the internal discussions as well that were happening as they were trying to figure out whether to go forward with Steve Scalise or whether to go forward with Jim Jordan. And it is still a big open question that needs to be resolved. The other thing I just wanted to flag is that now that we're up to, I think, 13 members who are opposing Jordan, now 14, one of those is Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, and that is notable because he is a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and we know that the Problem Solvers Caucus has been involved in some of those discussions about a potential bipartisan path forward. He is somebody who had backed Jordan on these last two rounds, but now it appears that he has flipped against Jordan. So that is significant to note, and of course we'll continue to watch what other members, how they, you know, cast their ballots going forward.
All right, Nikole, thank you. So we're going to continue to watch what's happening on the House floor, but we know, Jim Jordan has not secured the gavel, so who knows what will happen over. I should ask you, Nikole, probably no one's talked about this, but, you know, after this, now what? I mean, do they have to stay through the weekend? Are there any additional votes planned? I suppose not, but what happens next?
You know, look, I think Jim Jordan made clear this morning in his press conference that he wants to ride this out. He said that, his plan for the weekend is to keep going until they can elect a speaker. If we look back to how Kevin McCarthy did it, it was in a period of about 4 days where it's just vote after vote after vote after vote. So it's possible we could see that type of action to try to grind this thing out, because up until this point, Jordan's strategy has been to take a vote, then take a pause, talk to some of these holdout members. But, even yesterday after he had that discussion with holdouts, I spoke to one of them, Congressman Mike Kelly, and asked him, because he was pretty dug in, whether he's even willing to entertain more discussions at this point if Jordan wanted to speak with him again. Now, he didn't close the door to that, but his mind was made up, and the point that he made is that, this is somebody who just doesn't like to lose and, won't admit it. And we know someone else who is a close friend of Jim Jordan's who takes a similar approach. And so, that is the issue here. If Jim Jordan is going to keep going, whether he has those votes or not, or if there is a point in time where he decides to throw in the towel. And I think this is really going to be a game of hardball here, because I think it's very possible that Jim Jordan could go hard and keep going and keep going. But I also think for those who oppose him, they may keep going and going and going as well. And it really will just be a matter of which side blinks first.
Yeah, I said it earlier. I don't think it's the best comparison to compare the strategy to Kevin McCarthy's strategy, because it worked in the short term, but clearly didn't work in the long term. Nikole, viewers, we're going to continue to watch what's happening on the House floor. I know Nicole's going to be running down the hallways trying to catch up with these representatives when they eventually leave. Leslie Sanchez, Ashley Etienne, thank you so much for joining us. And we will have coverage of this vote and the fallout throughout the day, so stay with us.